So everyone, I'm going to get a little happy here today because I'm extremely happy about these two women being on. These women, I
Such a
love
blessing.
them like you don't know. So just want to let both of you know we're streaming out to about 10 networks.
And wonderful.
Okay,
So this is around the world.
fantastic.
So today is the state of the women. And honey, these two people could not be more knowledgeable, loving, and caring about what they will share with us today. We have Reverend Boycerie, who is with I'm going to say the United Methodist Women, because Reverend Boycerie, I can never get ecumenical correctly.
The you mean the Church Center for the Church Center for United Nations?
Yeah, I can't say the word ecumenical, so I'm not going to even try.
Oh, it's okay.
And then we have Hendrica Okando, who is all the way in Niger, working on behalf of women there, and from Kenya. My God, we're going to start the day. Wow. I'm pinching myself to have these two women together. You know, Reverend Boycerie and Hendrika do a lot of work with women, especially, they love all women, but in the communities of the women of color, especially, which is where the work is needed. And when we talk about work, we often hear, oh, thank you for the work you do. But what I want to say to everyone is we need the contribution, not the donation, the contributions to flow into these places and spaces and geographical spaces where these women do their work, not only so that they can be paid very well for their talents, so that they can recharge and do their work, but so that the work that they're creating can be fulfilled upon in their mission. I'm going to just go right on in. Reverend Boycerie.
Boissiere.
Boissiere,
I'm
excuse
sorry.
me. I'm always used to saying Reverend Dion, so
That's
Reverend.
okay.
Okay,
It's a French name.
Yes, Miss
Boissiere.
Okando. Yes, Miss Okando. Reverend Boissiere, you do something called Thursdays in Black. And I wanted to start there, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. Again, an honor, truly a joy to share any space, digital or otherwise, with Hendrika is a gift. And so thank you,
Oh,
Sister Gail,
thank
and the
you.
creators 2030 for doing all of this and for bringing women together and hearing our hearing about the work that we do.
Yeah.
So Thursdays in Black I have just been a champion for it, but it is a global initiative, right? It's a simple but a profound one of the World Council of Churches, of which the United Methodist Women and Ecumenical Women at the UN, all of us are a part of the churches that are within the global network there at Ecumenical Women at the UN, which I chair now. And it is it's a simple but a profound one. As I mentioned, we wear our Thursdays in Black pin, but we wear black, and I'm wearing black just to signify today on it. But every Thursday we wear black. And we reclaim black not as anything negative, but as a powerful, galvanizing color to signify our strength. It's used as a color of resistance and resilience. And what we do is we come together to call for the end of rape and all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls and the vulnerable communities, showing respect and the kind of love in the face of violence. And I'm encouraging others to do the very same. We have, of course, in this pandemic that we have been in, we are seeing so many women, and the numbers soaring time and time and time again. And so what we have done is at Ecumenical Women at the UN, what we have done is we've called to revitalize the pledge and to ask people to make the pledge, to stand with us. And so, that is literally just going to our website and literally taking the pledge. And the pledge simply means that I commit to Thursdays in Black in solidarity and in protest, in mourning, and for awareness, and in the hope with the global community to support, to be in solidarity, because 1 in 3 women worldwide face violence in their lifetimes. We understand that number to even be rising, of course. It means that we are in protest against the kinds of systems in our society that encourage violence. in any form, and we are in mourning for men and for women and for children who are harmed by sexual violence or killed by sexual violence, and that we are in solidarity for awareness and the kind of knowledge that teaches us and challenges us around the sort of norms that we have made sexualizing around sexualized or gender-based violence. And then we are in solidarity with hope, that a different reality is possible. So that is what we're doing. And so we ask on Thursdays for people to pray, to pause, to pray, to post, and then make the pledge.
Wow. Well, one thing I do want to say is these two women, I love them to death and have the blessing of having them involved with the work we do by gaining, advisement from them, and I'm grateful for them. Hendrica, you do a lot of work with women,
Yes,
and
yes.
I'd like you to tell us some of the solutions and the issue. Well, first start with some of the issues you see that women go through on a regular basis, whether they're here in the States or India or anywhere you've been in the world, and the work that you are doing on the ground to empower them from the inside out.
Yeah, I think first of all, I'd just like to support Reverend Dion on the Thursdays in Black. It's a very important campaign that I've been involved in for the last 5 years. I work with young women, and we make sure that every Thursday we post our picture in black to just remind the world about what happens to women and young girls, and to really say that we want a stop to sexual and gender-based violence, and especially within faith communities, because in the context that I work in the Sahel right now, non-state armed groups are using religion as a tool for attacking and abusing women. Right now, Sahel is burning. We have close to over 200 million women and girls who are displaced in displaced camps across the Sahel, across the 5 countries. The impact of the breakdown of Libya and the impact of the coup in Mali and the instability in Burkina Faso has had a direct impact on women and girls. And so for us, the campaign is critical, and especially when we have women of faith and women leaders who are standing with us, it gives us a lot of solace. We've just had Religions for Peace with Professor Azza, and they just had a big meeting on women and faith and diplomacy. And we really need the women of faith, women leaders, and women faith leaders to speak out, because like Reverend Dion said, within COVID, we have the second pandemic, which is the violence against women. So when we have lockdowns, it means that women and girls are locked down with their abusers. And we are coming up to the 16 days of activism that start on the 25th of November, and we are asking for more funding. And within the COVID response, to fund shelters for women, to fund, most of the women are caregivers. The demography that is impacted by COVID are the elderly, and I am in that group now because I'm 65. And so, but it is young women that are our caregivers, but they're also the ones who are the victims of gender-based violence, and very much within the faith communities. Because faith communities, especially in the Sahel where I'm working now, you have male religious leaders who are using the religious text to further oppress women. So we really need those feminist theologians to speak up. We need a better interpretation of religious text. And I'm very happy in Niger, I'm working with women of faith. I'm working with women who are Muslim women who are able to read and interpret the religious text. I just had a very profound training, a gender training for three days last week. And we were very clear that it's not the religion that is oppressing women, it's the culture, and it's the patriarchal culture. And unfortunately, for us in Africa, both for the Muslim and the Christian, it is the patriarchal leaders in other continents. So we have the white evangelical Christians exporting their hatred to this region. We have the extreme religious groups from the Middle East exporting their hatred to this region and funding the non-state armed groups who are kidnapping and raping and marrying girls. So we really need to speak out.
One of the things I want to talk about, and I'm so glad that you both are bringing this up. You know, later this week, as you know, Reverend Dion, I'm part of a COVID-19 task force for intimate partner violence this week, Hendrica, where we're dealing with intimate partner violence during this COVID-19, not only for women, but for children.
You're muted, Sister Gail.
I'm sorry. Very sorry. Not only are we talking, I'm glad you're talking about COVID, because during this COVID-19, as some of you know, Reverend Dion, I know you know, I'm at a COVID task force with a conference this week, starting tomorrow. And the very interesting thing about this is we are talking right now about intimate partner violence that's not only with women, but with parents who are being taken care of by their caregiving children, by even in the LGBTQIA area, and also by disability, people who are living with parents or caregivers who are taking care of them. So in this COVID-19, the level of abuse, whether emotional or mental, is on the highest range. You know, what's interesting to me is that all the talks that I've had before, everyone doesn't want to deal with these subjects, but these subjects that we're avoiding, it makes it worse when you don't deal with it. And so I want to ask your opinion. Both of you have been, you know, both women of faith, and, you know, Reverend Dion as a woman of multi-faith, Hendrica as a woman of faith, and as a woman who's there with other women. What are some of the solutions that both of you see to women who are dealing with gender violence, children, or anyone who's dealing with gender violence during this COVID-19, because now they're locked up with the exact assailants or people who are giving domestic violence emotionally, mentally, or physically?
So I know, Hendrica, you will of course have very much to say, because of course you're hands-on with doing the work where you are. And again, for me and for those of us who are coming alongside, let me first say that not only are the numbers from COVID and people who have contracted the virus, or people who are dealing with the virus, the numbers are surging. Of course, the cases are continuing to surge, the death tolls are rising and all. But you're talking about, in addition to these, in addition to what is happening with COVID, you're seeing the unfolding of the pandemics that have been existing long before the virus came. So this violence, the sexualized violence, the rape, the intimate partner violence, this has been happening, and now what COVID is doing is exposing it. just like COVID has exposed so many other things. So now on top, imagine what we're having, sort of the personal loss that people are already feeling, the grief that people are already feeling, the anxieties, that everything that's happening. And again, the kinds of crises and injustices that we have been seeing have been existing forever. Now, one of the things that I would say, to speak directly to it, is that we should begin to develop trauma informed ministries. And so this is the only way for me that I am seeing that we're going to be able to actually journey with. So in addition, so we're not talking about either or, right? This is always a both and. We must not only because there are safe houses that have been closed down because of COVID. There are places, shelters, and places where we could have directed some of our women and girls, some of our children that are being abused. All of these things have been shut down, or the numbers we've had to limit numbers because of COVID and the response. So what we have to begin to do is we need more volunteers, more people who are going to be able to physically go to help in places where there is need, and so that, in other words, so literally, if you have skills, if you are a doctor, you're a nurse, you are able to be to assist, if you're able to provide any kind of mental health, emotional health, those kinds of services, there's a call and a need for therapists, trauma therapists, because we're dealing with multiple traumas, compound grief and compound traumas, right? And so when we have trauma informed ministries, so that these are ministries that are dealing with not just the physical, but we're dealing with the emotional, the psychological, and the spiritual all together. We must be able to deal with that. Then the funding is what's needed now to be able to have spaces where we can get people to. Right? We need to be able to provide resources. And it's sort of like the Underground Railroad. I see sisters like Hendrica and us are like the Harriet Tubmans, right? Where we've got to wade through a lot of waters, trudge through a lot of the forests and the trees, and we've got to go in the dark at night, in the times when people are not necessarily going to be able to see, because we've got to be able to get them aid. We've got to be able to find a way of escape in the midst of a time where there seems like there's nowhere to go, and sometimes there physically is nowhere to go. So texting, getting people phones where they'll be able to they're able to text, or they're able to send messages, and so these kinds of things are helpful. In addition, people want to send clothes, and they want to send all these kinds of things to folks, and not to say that is not, we do not bemoan any of those things, but right now the technology is the only way that we're able to communicate and we're able to get into. So when we're talking about people who may not have those resources, in order to be able to get to them and to maybe get them to a place that's safe, we those who don't have access to that, we need to be able to get them access to those kinds of tools, the technology that they would need, the computers or the telephone, so they can text. You follow? These are the kinds of things in which we need to do. And so with trauma informed ministries, we're dealing with the whole soul, the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. And we are dealing with sort of meeting the needs, so that these pandemics, the triple pandemics that we're seeing, right? The multiple pandemics that we are seeing that are existing, that when we get rid of COVID, we need to get rid of this kind of violence too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've really said it spot on. We really need to have those trauma ministries, because I just read something today that 1 year of trauma leads to 10 years of dysfunctional mental health. So really what is happening in 2020 is going to be affecting us for the next 10 years. And as you say, we have had the pandemic, we've had HIV, we've had maternal, mortality, we've had early marriage is a pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. And 10 of the countries with the highest level of child marriage are in sub-Saharan Africa. And we find that with COVID and schools closing down, the girls are not going to go back when the schools open. We have early pregnancies. And so, but I'm very proud of the women's movement across the world. They have rallied together. They have provided resources. Young women's organizations are on Twitter. So in Kenya, for example, you can go on Twitter and get transport during the curfew to go to a hospital. And it's young doctors that are providing that. There's a young doctor in Kenya that has started an ambulance that actually goes into the slum areas during curfew and takes women who are pregnant into the hospitals. And that's the funding. We need more funding for women's organizations. We need more funding for faith communities, because faith communities are providing education. And as you said, they are providing the technological tools. It's a new normal now. For communities where there is no electricity, they are providing solar-enabled laptops. They are providing classes on radios. And although with COVID, there's limited, a lot of the services are now online. And in many countries, the young people are providing access to online services. And that's really fantastic, because I can get to watch Reverend Dion giving one of her powerful sermons sitting in the Sahel desert, So we are connected. And that's what we want. We want more funding. And I was happy at the Women and Faith and Diplomacy Summit of the Religions for Peace. They are starting a COVID fund that is going to be funding women as diplomats, going into those spaces, talking to these male leaders and saying there's a new normal now. And women need to get into the digital space, but we need to make the digital space safe. And I think, as you clearly said it, women need to have, in the Sahel now, instead of distributing food, we are giving cash. And we realize that women don't have telephones. So they are actually being given telephones. And so that they can get a cash transfer. And, last week I did an evaluation in one of the refugee camps, and the women told me they are more respected now, because we have, I'm working for WFP, so we have consciously said women are the heads of the household. And we had to negotiate with faith leaders so that on Friday, when they make the call for prayer, they actually talk about how the religion protects women and allows women to be in charge of the household. And slowly it's changing. The men have allowed the women to receive the cash, and they get cash transfers. And they said that gives them more power than when we give them food. If they get food for 3 months, they are targeted by the armed groups. But if they have cash, they can make a decision, on what type of food to have, and they are seeing themselves in control, And then we had a lot of discussions with the older women in terms of protecting the girls, so that when the schools open, the girls can go back to school. And it's exciting, because we have some young women who are role models, and in Niger we have young women who are running a Twitter for Niger, and they meet physically every Saturday. They collect money, they collect clothes, and they go to the refugee camps, they go to the IDP camps. So they are using the digital space to mobilize. And girls, those associations need funding, because they are women, they understand what a woman in a refugee camp who doesn't have sanitary pads, who doesn't have access to water. So when we're telling them wash your hands and there's no water, so, and they are really doing a lot of advocacy. So I agree with you. We need those resources to get the technological tools and to mobilize and to continue supporting women's organizations, and particularly women of faith.
All I can say is, wow. When we look at these things and the seriousness of this, Hendrika, I want to go to this question with you and then have Reverend Dion follow up on this last one. Um, when we look at women all over the world, both of you deal with women who are all the way from India, from Thailand and places like that, all the way to Europe, Latin America, women who are here in America in general, and women who, on the outside, they're going into the corporate office, even in India or whatever, they're going in the corporate office, seem like they have it all together. Children look perfect, husbands look perfect, but then when they're going home, it's either emotional or mental abuse. Okay? And now these women are at home with that abuser, maybe, all in one place. Hendrika, I know you deal with usually in the other countries, but you've been all over the world as well. What do you see that all women have in common that have gone through abuse, no matter what economical level they have been through? What do you see about that?
I think as Reverend Dion said, I see trauma. I have young women that I worked with in Geneva, that I worked with in New York, and that I worked with in Australia, who are struggling because they're losing their self-esteem, because of the lockdown. They are locked with their abusers. And as we said before, the shelters are not there. The support system that you get when you go into an office and you can share with your colleagues is not there. I recall when I worked in Geneva, we had a young woman, who was Swiss, who was being abused by her partner. But she would come to the office. She literally moved into the office and would bring her child to the office. And we all supported her. She eventually left that partner and was able to rebuild her confidence and eventually get another partner that respected her. Now that escape is no longer there in lockdown, and for the children who are being abused, normally it would be the teachers in school that would be able to pick up that this child is being abused. But if they can't go to school, it's a double trauma. So the mother is being abused and the child is being abused. And then, of course, like when I'm training, even in the refugee camps, I say even the men have been traumatized because with COVID, they have lost their jobs. And patriarchy tells you that you're the head of the house, and you're the head of the house with no resources. And normally you could go out of the household and maybe share with others, but now you're stuck in the house. So you become the abuser, but you yourself are traumatized. And that's where you need, those trauma ministries to give solace both to the men and the women. But for us to have the resources, I've seen the difference that cash has made to women. I've seen the support that the women have been giving each other on Twitter, you know, across the continents. If you take the protest that happened in Nigeria last month, the support was given by feminist groups, and it was feminist groups across the continents feminist groups in Europe, in the US, that were funding those young women to provide support. And that's why we were talking about more and more having the Thursdays in Black campaign will visibilize this pandemic. And some people are calling it a shadow pandemic. It's not. It's a greater pandemic than COVID because it's not going to go away. Those children that are in those abused spaces are going to be traumatized for life. You know, if they are young men, they're going to become abusers. If they are young women, they are going to normalize abuse. So we really need more funding, more support, and the solidarity, a global solidarity. Yeah.
Take it from here, Reverend Dion. Your thoughts on what Hendrika has shared.
I would just say ashe to what she has said, and amen. I mean, this because she's said it all. So remember now what trauma actually is, right? So it is it is an injury or a wound that from a physical injury, an emotional injury, a psychological injury, from violence, right? Um, that produces pain. And literally, so this pain traumatizes, it wounds, it paralyzes it. There's the wounds are very deep, and so that's why exactly what Hendrika said. um it is not a shadow pandemic at all. It has been there before. It is now being exposed, and people are being forced to look at it and being forced to see what is actually happening. And now the question is, what are people going to do about it? What are we going to do? And we are seeing how women are mobilizing, and now we're also seeing brothers that are mobilizing, and we need men to become involved as well. And this is very critical. So in order to end the cycle of patriarchy and the things that will actually um, feed the kinds of traumas that we're seeing and the kinds of violence that we're seeing, we must get men involved, right? And so, and please don't misunderstand us to say that we know that men are also, as Hendrika said, being traumatized. We also know that men have been on the side of being abused, but the numbers show that wherever there is war, wherever there is violence, wherever there is any kind of conflict, it is the women and the children that are the ones, the numbers of them that are that feel the afflictions even the more, right? So what we need to do is to continue to listen to women. We need to believe women, and we need to be able to help fund their freedom, right? And freedom should not come through death only. And this is the problem. We find people finding or choosing, because of these kinds of traumas that they're experiencing, that they feel like the only answer is death. The only escape is death. This is also why you're seeing the numbers for suicides that are also rising. We're going into a time, because seasonal depression is very, very real, and people are going into that kind of depression here too. And so you see the numbers also rise anyway during the time, winter times. I'm talking about here in the north, right? So imagine experiencing that and being in COVID and being sheltered in place with your abuser, because they're not sheltered in place. They're surviving in place. They're trying to survive in place, right? With them. So I would only say that is the same thing that every woman has seen and experienced, no matter how put together. I'm going back to answer your question, Gail. No matter how put together they may seem on the outside, every woman has experienced trauma in some form, or been connected to a woman, been connected to a girl that has been traumatized. And so if we're to be our sisters' keepers, if we're to be God's hands and feet in the earth, then we need to be able to walk and journey with them towards freedom on this side of heaven. Right. And so this is what we need to be able to do. And for those who are on the front lines, those justice keepers and those justice seekers, those who are those activists who are in or are standing sort of in the gaps, we need to be sure to protect them as well, because they're risking their lives in addition to be able to help save others' lives too. So we need to be able to do that. So there's a lot of work to do, and we can find where we fit in it, but we need to be able to come together to do the work, because we need it.
My very last question. You know, this group here is that we're coming together with. It's not just myself. It's, you know, and our group, the Creators 2030, but it's COM 26B, the three Peacemakers. This is all about bringing this women's blueprint together, especially with Indigenous women. This is my very last question to both of you. We've talked about women in general, but women who are in Indigenous communities. I mean, Reverend Dion and Hendrica, you know Roberto, who deals with the Indigenous community. Okay, he was talking about the importance of understanding why the word Indigenous is Indigenous to the Indigenous, and the importance of understanding of that, and why they had to fight for that their voice to be heard at the UN and anywhere else as Native peoples. But it's a difference than Native peoples. It is Indigenous. And Indigenous women throughout this country and this world are normally small island states, Indigenous here in the different tribal communities, are sometimes raped, left to the side of the road, buried. There's parts of this country where they're never seen again and they go off to school, okay? Or even beaten by their own Indigenous husbands, or they just go through a lot. It doesn't have to be their own people. What do you want to say, because we're dealing with the Indigenous community here, Hendrica and Reverend Dion, what would you like to say, what of your knowledge of the Indigenous communities of the women, because they face a lot around the world with no voice at all?
No, I think that's really an important point, because when we're talking about oppression and colonialism and the whole brutal, savage capitalism that is the system that rules the world, that is controlled by patriarchy, Indigenous women suffer all those oppressions. And like Reverend Dion said, their men are traumatized because, first of all, you have communities, Indigenous communities, that were a lot more equal and just. But because of oppression and colonialism, they lost their rights. And so the men are doubly traumatized, and they take out that trauma on the women. So we really need to create space for those women to speak for themselves. You know, I mean, I come from Kenya, and we know that most of the national parks in Kenya belonged to Maasai. And the Maasai communities have been marginalized completely. They don't control the parks. And, you know, the women are completely, they are brutalized. We market Kenya using their pictures, using their traditional outfit, but they don't have any rights. And we need to give them that space in the UN to reclaim their space, to articulate their voices. And when we talk about violence that is happening among women, for Indigenous women, it's 3 times. It's violence from the state machinery, it's violence from the oppressors, and it's violence from their men who are traumatized. I mean, I was working for the YWCA for 10 years, and we had a young Canadian woman from the First Nation become a board member. And when that girl gave her first, and she was also a woman of faith, when she gave her first sermon on the World Day of Prayer, we all cried. I mean, can you believe that the First Nation women in Canada were not allowed to vote? They were denied the vote while migrant women were given the vote. She had the numbers of the women that are murdered every year, of the women that disappear, of the women that commit suicide, and we've seen the same thing with the Roma community in Europe. They've been marginalized, they've been discriminated. And when you raise it, immediately the Europeans will say, no, 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 that's an African problem. And you see the, early marriages within the Roma community, you see the violence, so and of course, you don't even want to talk about Australia. I mean, I'm happy to see New Zealand, that Jacinta is being celebrated for giving the Maori their own God-given right. She appointed a Maori woman as a foreign minister. And you're like, people come to your country, they take over your country, and then they give you what was yours, and we celebrate them. So we really need more Indigenous women. We need to work in solidarity and give them space to speak their truth and to do that diplomatic work to be more visible.
I would say the same. Again, just echoing what Hendrica has said. When we're talking about First Nations peoples, right? Because they're the indigenous of this nation, right? And then there's the indigenous that are of all of the other countries as we have. We see the First Nations peoples, and we see them. And I want to say we because we have been also marginalized women, right? Women of color. We tend to see each other when the world does not see us. And so the one thing that I would echo is creating the spaces for us to tell our own stories. People have asked me oftentimes, "Oh, what do you think about another kind, this kind of women, or Korean women, or other women?" I can't speak for them. You have to. We cannot speak on behalf of any other women. We can stand with them, and we can make sure that we help to create the spaces where their stories are being heard, and where they are able to be able to vote, that they're able to participate in civic society. They are able to have the right human rights, literally just human rights, as we're going as they navigate trying to live a life in the world and in society. The other part of it is we have to respect the way that they want to conduct their lives, respect their cultures, respect their traditions, and support them as they're going through. There's a prayer that we ask people, the ecumenical women, for Thursdays in Black, which I think is very appropriate for standing with. And it's a simple prayer, and we ask people to pray with us on Thursdays in Black. And it says, "We stand with invisible victims of sexual and gender-based violence. We see you, we hear you, you are not forgotten." And so these our indigenous sisters have been invisible victims of violence of epic proportions. And so we must say, we see you, we hear you, you are not forgotten, and we will work with you to be able to get what is rightfully yours, which is your voice to be heard, and a space where you are able to support yourself, your families, your communities, and celebrate the culture that has been stolen and ripped from them. So that's what I would have to say, in addition to put an exclamation point to what my sister Hendrica has said.
One of the things I want to say in closing this, I want to thank both of you for being a part of this and taking your time out of your day. I'm going to say something very bold today. Normally, I keep my mouth shut in some places, but we have different geographical spaces and places. I consider you two women to be the most grounded women that I've met and who are around. And I try to always surround myself with the people that will make you grow when you don't want to grow, and will cause you to grow when you don't want to grow. But I want to say this to some of the audience members, to even some of my compatriots and my partners. I asked some people to join the broadcast. They would really rather join the fluffy, wuffy broadcast. This is where I say about women coming together. We as women, you'll join or get together when it's something that you feel comfortable about. But when I ask people to really join in on this broadcast with these two powerful women, you see, that's when you know who's real and who's not real. Because it's not about, some people, I understand, capacity to understand and deal with a conversation. So that is not what I'm speaking to here. I'm speaking to when you say you're about prayer, when you say you're about being grounded and connecting with someone, okay? But then you rush away. You don't have the time. You don't want to do this one. This Women's Day is not about how good looking the woman is, how young the woman is, how old the woman is, middle class, young, old, whatever. It is about being a group of women and coming together and supporting each other, not separate from men or the LGBTQIA, but understanding ourselves, because it starts from within ourselves. Sometimes, as Hendrica and you have said, sometimes you don't grow up with the silver spoon in your mouth. So you start from what you learn, but you have to learn on your own. Like one of the other young ladies said, Eller, she had a family that just, was used to serving, but did not know how to love themselves. And I end with this, the most powerful thing she said was, my mother and grandmother were very strong women, very independent women, but they still didn't know their own potential, because they were strong and independent to take care of the family, to take care of everyone around them, but they didn't understand their own potential within them, within themselves. That's a very powerful place. That is a very powerful place. So I just really had to echo that today. People come to me and say, oh, I want to join or whatever. I asked some of my partners to join and they didn't join. And I'm not making anyone wrong, but my thing is, this is not about who can get who or how many Zooms or how many followers. This is real stuff with real people taking their time to not share about so you know what they do, but to understand the issue at hand and be the solution to it. You never know when you can be someone's solution. So I really, what COVID has taught me is let go of the BS and get real. This is where we are, and what I love about these two women, they keep me grounded. And so it doesn't matter what age and stage you are, it's about being grounded. So we're here for the indigenous women in addition to all the women, but the COM26 conference that we're doing here is about indigenous women. So I invite every indigenous woman to come together with every Black woman, every Asian woman, every Spanish woman, every white woman, every Muslim woman. I don't care where you're from, but it's time to get off the bull crap and actually really work together, no matter your economic stance. And if someone mentally is not ready to handle the capacity, that's okay. They will get there one day. But that kind word you said to them, they may remember it in another time. So I just want to thank you both. Is there any last things, Hendrica or Reverend Dion, you'd like to say?
Yeah, I think for me, what you just said is profound. My daughter sent me something that's going around WhatsApp that says, my grandmother told me to keep quiet and not be heard. My mother told me to speak up, but to make sure that I had a husband and children. But I am going to tell my daughter that I respect her choices. And no matter what she does, I respect her choices. And I thought that was so powerful, and to say that really what the women that we have now, especially the young women and across the continent, whether in the LGBTQ communities or poor or uneducated, we all have one important thing. We want to be free to make choices. The young women that I meet in the refugee camps, they get so excited when I tell them that I'm from Kenya, but I've come to Niger, I speak French, and I've come to help them. And they're like, we want to be like you, Mama. We want to travel, They say to me, oh, do you have a husband? I say, yes. And he's at home, he's doing the cooking and waiting for me. And they're like, we want to be like you, Mama. I'm like, you will be like me.
Hendrica, when I grow up,
freedom.
like you.
Yeah.
Be like you
Yeah.
too.
What you said. Yeah. So what you just said is, if we can give everybody freedom, and one of the young women said to me, it's we need to emancipate ourselves. And she was actually, she doesn't know any English, but she could sing that song of emancipate yourself. And I thought that we'll end on that note. Let us emancipate ourselves and emancipate our sisters.
Yes. And of course, Reverend Dion, because I know we have to run, I have like 40, 50 seconds. Anything left you want to share in your last words?
So Mama has said it all. I'm so grateful for her. So Mama has said it all. But that great prophet, Bob Marley, who said, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our
Amen.
mind." And so it's us, right, who can do that
Yeah.
work. And so we just pray that that we can be able to do the work and to do it together.
Yeah.
Ashe.
I have two women who say something very powerful. Stephanie Mark said, "Thank you for sharing your wisdom." And Drea said, "Can you pray for me because I just removed my birth control and would like to pray that I am fertile for my family, my husband." So please,
Oh, yes, we will pray. And we will
okay?
continue to pray, keep you, both of you, covered in prayer for the desires of your heart and for God's will to be done.
Well, I
Yes.
thank you. And if you would just stay in the back room for just a moment, and we're going to go into the next. Thank you, everyone.